All right, the future of web animation. So usually I get up here and I do a bunch of things where I try to make performant animations in the browser and give you tips on how to work with performant animations. But it's gotten a little bit boring. I have so many videos like that out there in the world. So if you want to see something like that, then go watch one of those. But today we're going to take things a step further. We're going to talk about the future of web animation and what might be possible in the future. We're going to start with some things that you can already do today. So things that are like kind of cutting edge, things that are maybe experimental, things that you can try in apps now that many people haven't tried yet. And then we're going to take it a step further. So it's going to be kind of exciting. So before we talk about the future of the web, the first thing that we need to deal with and talk about is the goal of the web. The web is first and foremost about communicating. We can communicate happiness. We can share stories and memes. We can talk about fear and talk about politics. But really what we're trying to do, the main goal of the web, is to communicate with each other. So what does this have to do with animation? Well, I want you to think back to your earliest sensory memories. I want you to think back to the first time that media, not something in your lives, but something like media, made you feel any one of these things. Happiness, sadness, fear, curiosity. Could it have been Spirited Away? Maybe it was, Up. Maybe it was Toy Story or WALL-E. How about something that makes you feel all of them? Let's jump out.
Boo. Boo. Oh, look at that. Yeah,
So we have happiness.
That's cute. Yeah. Boo. Well, that's very nice. Come here, you. Oh, he's a happy bird. Nothing's coming out of your closet to scare you anymore, right?
Fear.
Yeah. Goodbye, Boo.
Kitty.
Kitty has to go.
Sadness. Curiosity.
Boo. Kitty.
So the reason we talk about these things and the reason why it's so exciting to us and the reason why, let me get my mouse again. The reason why, the reason why it was then so exciting to me and is still so exciting to me now is that anything can happen. You see, emotions attach to the limbic system, making things easier to recall. If I asked you what happened to you someday when you were 5 years old, you might not remember what happened that day, but you might actually remember all the words to Hakuna Matata or Under the Sea. These cartoons may have seemed like just basic line drawings and entertainment, but they gave color and shape to our imaginations and brought life to our internal worlds. Part of the reason we could do this, what was then exciting and is still so exciting to me, is that anything can happen. And that's why when we talk about the future of the web and the future of what's possible on the web, we talk about animation. I'm Sarah Drasner. I'm known on Twitter as Sarah Edo. As mentioned, I write for CSS Tricks. I'm also head of developer experience at Netlify. Netlify is neither Netflix or Shopify, even though that really confuses my parents. But what it is super awesome, and that's why I really wanted to go work there and reach out to them. So I'm here today to talk about the web's bright future. We're going to start with what's available to you today, and then we're going to push the boundaries even further with the goals for the future. So let's first talk about hooks, but we're going to talk about hooks in Vue. Because I think that we talk a lot about hooks in React, and a lot of people might not know that hooks are available in Vue or that they will be available in Vue. But just recently, something changed. We have hooks in 2.x. In Vue 3, we're actually changing them to be composition components. How many of you have had software change right when you were working on it and you had to update some code? Yeah, like most of us, right? So a lot of the code that you're going to see here works experimentally in 2.x. It won't work in future versions in 3.x. We're going to have a slightly different API for it. But all of the underlying concepts are the same. OK, so what makes hooks so interesting? What makes hooks in framework world in general, aside from React, also with Vue, just like all together, so exciting? It's because there are times when you need disparate pieces of stateful logic, and you need to encapsulate them so that you can use them all over your application and use them in myriad ways. So let's look at this food application I made for example. You can see how the corner animates that logo, and then the food actually animates as well. Those titles animate in. So with each of these restaurants, the text does the same animation as we work with it. So we might want to keep animation consistent across an application. We might want to reuse that same kind of animation in different ways, just like we do with design systems and patterns. And this is done with JavaScript, right? It's not done with CSS. So I might want to encapsulate that stateful logic of the animation and reuse it in several different ways. You might have noticed that the logo has this lettering animation that I showed. But what I didn't show was that if you kind of bring the window down for using a media query, basically, you're not seeing that animation anymore. If you're on a phone, it doesn't fire. So a media query is something that in JavaScript is something that I might want to use all over the application as well. I might want to use the animation separately from the media query, and I might want to use them both together. So in the first hook, we'll gather some information about the window width. And in the second, we use a conditional to show different animation logic depending on the window size. So now we can reuse the first hook for other tasks because it's decoupled. Now we pass the first hook as a parameter to the second hook, and we're allowed to compose those pieces together. And this is where it's really, really cool. Because hooks achieve what mixins do, but they avoid two main problems with mixins, because mixins in Vue can also achieve the same things. They allow us to pass state, and they also make it really explicit where that logic is coming from by the return value. So if you're using more than one mixin, they're not aware of each other. They don't have any access to each other or access to each other's state. But with hooks, we actually have the ability to compose multiple disparate pieces of logic together. So if you want to learn more about that, there's an article here and a demo here and a repo that you can check out. So those are all things that you can explore. Cool. Let's move on to the next thing. All right, let's talk about how to make your existing site a little bit more intuitive using page transitions. The web has become under critique in recent years because it doesn't, for iOS and Android apps, we get these nice, slick, smooth animations from one state to another, and the web doesn't typically do that, right? For every new page, we actually have to remap all of those values. So this is a heat map of an eye on a page. As you go from page to page, you're having to actually remap all of those pieces of the space, and actually it incurs a lot of cognitive load because you have to create those mental maps every single time. So what if we reduce this cognitive load and maintain state for the user? I love this example by Kathy Sierra from Badass Making Users Awesome. It's like every time you use one of these stoves, you just have like a second where you have to think about what knob goes to what burner. But if you just change it slightly, just slightly, the cognitive load goes away. you actually know exactly what burner is associated with what knob. And we're not incurring a lot of things here. We're actually doing less work. We're just showing people exactly where it is. So recently, Jira made an update that reorganized all of the information on the page. And they did this in a way to make sure that everything was clustered in similar areas so that you could scan and understand it much better. But what was interesting about this release wasn't necessarily these two page views, it was how they did it. So not only does the final design adequately arrange everything so that you can scan more easily, but the way they was to a lot of AV problems today. The way they announced it was to show how all of those spaces are remapped and move into place. So to achieve effects like this on the web, we're going to use a thing called Nuxt. So if you use React and use Next.js, Nuxt is Vue's version of that. It offers server-side rendering and code splitting and all sorts of other things. It also offers page transitions directly under the hood. Oh, and also out-of-the-box routing. So in order to create fully routed Vue applications, all you have to do is put a .vue file in the pages directory, and it'll set up routing for you. It'll automatically create something like that. And then you can also see in layouts, default.vue, we have this persistent layout we're going to use for each one of the pages, but you can make several different layouts, like let's say you have a blog layout or something like that. You can reuse those components as well. So if you're not familiar with Vue single file components, this is what they look like. You have a template area where you have your HTML, you have a script area where you have your script, and you have your style, which you can also scope to the component. You either use the scoped keyword or attribute, or you don't, and then it's global. But usually we kind of suggest that you work with these scoped styles. So what's nice about that is you have everything kind of encapsulated in one .vue file, and that's how you make one of these pages. So you'll be given an index page in the pages directory, and if you set up a mirror one with links that point to each other, you can see you already have a fully routed application. This is like one terminal command and then creating a file, and that's it. So that's super cool. But there's something more. In Vue, we have a transition component, and that allows us to have hooks to apply animation for the enter and leave states. And Nuxt assumes that you might want this functionality out of the, just out of the box, so it actually offers that page transition hook right there for you. So you don't have to do any kind of setup. You can just plug into the CSS classes and use those to create animations, and then you can have layouts that go into, have enter and leave states. Another thing that's cool, and this is what I personally like, is they also have JavaScript hooks that you can work with. So you can make really dynamic stuff. So you can do things like this. Never do this. This is just me messing around. Just never do that to your users. But you can, but you shouldn't. This is kind of like the software and ethics talk that we saw earlier. Like, you should, you can't, don't do that. OK, so these JavaScript hooks, we have these transition modes. So you can see that I'm using this library called GreenSock, where I can use TweenMax, and I can apply all of these really cool animations to it. I also have this transition mode that says out in. That means wait for one page to leave and then do the animation of the next page coming in, which is really cool because usually we don't have that, and there can be like things happening at the same time, which you can solve with like weird delays. But like if you change the timing value, then you have to update the delays, or you can do a callback, which can lead to callback hell. Here, we're literally just saying transition mode out in. It waits for the entire thing to transition out and then brings the new page in, which is actually kind of hard to implement. Not too hard, but it's a little bit of a slog. So you can make things like this, where you can have really slick animations that come per page. If you pay attention, all of the ways that the text and mountains are coming in are a little bit different per page too. So each one has kind of like an individual page. I could have set it up so that they all use the same one in that default.vue, that layout's default. But I could also do one that's particular for each one. And because it's done with SVG, it's like super easy to make responsive. The SVG scales, and it's the same kind of functionality for each. OK, so here's where the repo and the demo are to check out. But this is the first step. Let's take it further. Really, what we want to make is something like this, where when we go from page to page, we're retaining state for the entire application. We're going through. We have a few different things we can do, but we can even switch the users. And then we go to the page, and it has all of that new user's information as well. And it changes all of the kind of information for the application so we can have a more personalized view. But we still have those specific pieces of animation that look really slick per page as well. So first we set up a Vuex store. A Vuex store is similar to Redux if you're used to React. So here in the store, we're storing the page that we're on and a mutation that allows us to update that page. Then we'll use that mutation to update the state by committing it in middleware. So middleware gives us access to the root context where I can say, like, what page are you? OK, great, thank you. And then I store it in the store that's available for your application. But I also have to add that middleware and register it in Nuxt.js, in the Nuxt config.js. And then in Layout's default view, I have the app navigation component. That persists on every single page. So that app navigation, if I put it in the Layout's default, basically all of our page is going to be routed through that Nuxt component. But I can put things like headers and footers above or below, and they stay persistent. So then in the app nav transition, I'm going to create a transition group component. Let's talk about that transition group component real quick. Transition group component applies flip under the hood. So Vue already gives you this transition group component. You can just wrap anything around it, and then it will apply these flip animations. Does anybody know what flip means? Get like one or two people, that's OK. It's not commonly used, but basically, if you're trying to move a lot of different things on the web, using transforms is the most performant way to do that. But the way that's most performant to use these transforms is to get the coordinates from the first element's position, find its last position, and invert that, so finding the distance between those, and then so it's first, last, invert, play. Now, that's OK to implement for one element, but it becomes kind of hard to do for like lots and lots of elements. So rather than making you, and that's actually when the performance is really, really good, right? That's when you really want to have something like that. So that transition group component applies all of this logic under the hood. So it's really cool. So we can do something like this, where we wrap all of our elements in the nav, and then we apply some style. So we're just going to apply it, these transitions, just say, like, OK, when you're transitioning, generally do this. And then we tell it where we want it to be in the last place. Like on that page, there's a page called place. We're applying a class conditionally based on that Vuex store. And now you know how to make all of those animations. So we're storing the page context, and then we basically just apply some transitions between them, or we can use CSS or JavaScript, and it works for each one of them. Cool. So that's something that you can do in your applications. I have my demo with Vue and Nuxt. I wrote an article about it, and then Simona Kotin forked it to Angular. And Sean Wang Swix, who's on my team now at Netlify, forked it to React. So you can actually use this on any one of those frameworks. It doesn't have to be Vue and Nuxt. That's like basically the concepts that you're going to be using for each one of those frameworks. OK. So we just looked at some ways to create seamless page transitions and animations on the web. And as you saw, some of those experiences were responsive. And at this point, you're with responsive design. Right? That's something that we typically do. It's been around for a while. So we can accomplish a lot of responsive with grid, flexbox, media queries. But what if our websites weren't just responsive in 2 dimensions, but 3? What if the browser offered some basic specs to hook into and create these experiences with ease, just like flexbox or media queries? So if we had a phone and we're browsing and looking at this kind of experience here, and we have like a kind of cheap headset that we pop it into, and at first it's just kind of like the same thing, and it moves around, and it's kind of the same experience. But what if we detected that and it all of a sudden knew, hey, like this is a scene that you actually want to pan around? And if you're on a site where you're like at a hotel or it's place-based, you might actually want that information, right? That gives you so much more information than the 2-dimensional version. So I made this demo of these techniques that you can do using some of the stuff that I just showed you with the Vue Nuxt page transitions. So here we're going into Vue Amsterdam. I did a click here, but you can also do what's detected by the headset, and then you can look around. So you're looking at the whole scene. You get a better sense of what it would be to travel to Amsterdam. On the page itself, we capture the coordinates of the mouse as it moves, and then we'll update some transforms as well as perspective origin on those DOM elements. We'll also create sphere buffer geometry with 3JS with the location image as the mesh. So what I mean by that is I create a circle, I apply a mesh to the inside of that circle, right? That's how I'm putting that in. And then I'm going to take the camera and I'm going to pull it so that it's in the center of that circle and can pan around the circle so that that mesh is now something that we can look around in. Yeah. But what's interesting here, though, is not actually how it was made with current browser technologies, but how it could feasibly be made in the future with a new spec, if the specs allowed for it. So if we want to make this div a circle, we can apply a border radius. But what if, to make it a three-dimensional circle with grass, what if we had something that had at media VR and we could simply apply with a bit of CSS something like material? So here's what we do in 3JS. We have a few different env maps and things that materials we can work with. But 3JS can be kind of hard to set up. So what if the browser offered these capabilities when it detected something that was 3D or more 3D experiences? This is a leaked screenshot of the Chrome DevTools. It might be of what might be on the horizon for 3D responsive coming out. So if you don't already know Josh Carpenter, you should follow him on Twitter. He posts really amazing stuff. So this is them building out these basic primitives that you might be able to use in the future. So here's a detailed view of a chair and what that might look like. If you're in a two-dimensional experience, same thing. It's just like a flat experience, and it's totally fine. But if you have the ability to pan around, then you get offered some things by the browser to make that experience a bit more rich. Cool, huh? So in fact, he was on the A-Frame team. They invented some of these primitives for 3D experiences. So here's a demo showing some of the small primitives that you can use for a more complex scene, and also the visual inspector that comes with that they might be use in Chrome. And it doesn't end there. If we were using building blocks to explore augmented reality as well, what if the browser let us extend what the user was seeing and give us information that was encapsulated within it using native specs? Right now we can accomplish something like this with ARKit, but what if these experiences were available to us with native JavaScript and CSS? Think about how it could advance our teaching capabilities. If you have to learn chemistry from a textbook or something like this as a kid, what are you likely to remember? I mean, think about the periodic table of elements and how you learned all of these things. You can actually get a sense of how things combine and how they work together, and maybe even how they kind of work together to make something new. I mean, we talked about emotions attaching to the limbic system. This makes it much easier for me to connect those dots and recall. So the abilities and capabilities for teaching are really extraordinary. And you could apply this to learning other tactile things as well, like piano. I guess it's not wanting to play because the computers hate me today. There we go. So if we're playing piano, really these notes are an abstraction for your fingers, right? That's a mental model that you have to connect those two things. So we're actually just reducing the cognitive load of those notes and making them connected more intrinsically with the piano that you're actually seeing. Okay, we are going to jump out of this and try this again. Let me try to not lose my cursor this time. Can I do that? No? I definitely can't. Okay. It's this way. Yeah? Yes. Okay.
All right, who wants to see a volcano? 3, 2, 1. Wow! Look at that lava, look at that smoke coming out of that.
Pretend you're an airplane and fly over the tornado.
That's the top of it.
What do you see?
It's either asteroids, meteorites.
We're learning about DNA and genes, things that we can't see. And so the most exciting thing for me with the AR technology was that I could see kids get an aha moment that I couldn't get by just telling them about it.
The minute I saw it pop up on the screen, it made me want to get up and walk to it.
We actually get to turn around and look at things from all angles. So it it gave us a nice perspective.
See if you can figure out what that might be based on what you know about the respiratory system.
I got to see where the alveoli branched off, and I could look inside them and see how everything worked, which I never saw before, and it was really, really cool.
I mean, that's so cool, right? Because spatial awareness is really important. How big things are relative to us, how things move, all of these things get people in classrooms super excited with this AR expeditions. Because we live in a world that's in 3D, and we live in a world that's in motion. People often think of these experiences as additive, but static 2D is actually an abstraction of 3D in motion. This is complementing our reality, not pushing us away from it. And education isn't the only place where motion can be really effective. If you're trying to buy something or you're trying to explore a product, you get a better sense of it if you can look around it. I mean, that's the reason why you go to stores, right, is to pick it up, to get a sense of it, to look all the way around. And you can understand these products just a little bit better if you can get a better view of them. And it's not just for things like product and teaching. Virtual reality can actually benefit seniors. So in Aditi's post, How Virtual Reality Benefits Seniors, she talks about some of the research that she did at Microsoft in VR with elderly people in disorders. One of the participants was overcome with emotion as she told us she had macular degeneration. The VR experience was the clearest she had seen in over a year. There are even games like this Sea Hero Quest. This is super cool. So they create this game, and it's about spatial awareness in these kind of VR, AR experiences, and they allow many, many people to play with it. Well, it turns out that when you are dealing with dementia and Alzheimer's in elderly people, one of the first things to go is the spatial awareness. So if everyone plays this game, basically what they get is the ability to detect early onset, or they get the ability to detect these kind of symptoms in people that they couldn't normally detect with just basic tests. So they start to see, oh, okay, we know that this is coming, and they're able to treat them more effectively and earlier. They're also, because it's a game, instead of inviting 3 or 4 or 7 people to do a control testing, they can deploy it and have many thousands of people try it out, and the data becomes much more accurate. So that can be really cool as well. So I'm really excited about how some of these things can creatively be used for medicinal uses. Or what if it's progressive enhancement? So here's a regular book that functions well as a book. It's an awesome book. But if you have an iPad, you get a different kind of experience. You can actually see the creatures kind of jump out and move, and they're three-dimensional. You can move around with the iPad and see a different point of view and see them animated. But the book still exists, right? This is kind of like the browser thing where the two-dimensional experience is still there. The book is still there. But if you have the ability for something a little bit more, then you can have them. So remember this from before? This isn't just a metaphor for how we perceive cartoons, it's also how we create them. In old cell animation, we broke these pieces down into smaller bits, and they became reusable and had depth. In the movies of the past that we spoke before uses techniques just like the ones we just covered, where we basically have all of these different layers. And this movie that's not going to play any sound for you is actually showing how in old animations they made this basically become true, because they would have these flat pictures, and the flat pictures didn't give that sense of depth, right? It was too flat. It made people kind of lose faith in that experience. So what they did was they made many, many layers, and then they built a camera so that they could explore those layers and that depth and have the camera at a certain level. The cool thing that you're missing, you should watch this video later with the sound, because they've got these trumpets playing. It's like bum, 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 it's really dramatic. I should do that too, be up here with buffer arrays, boom, boom. So you can see that they're actually expanding and contracting that camera to give that illusion of depth in these old Disney movies. And then what they did was create this camera, and they made it sideways so that you could explore it down. In just a second, they'll actually show you the video where you can see backwards and forwards how that scene looked. So that's what the camera that they use. But you can see how, if you're working on the web, you would treat those as different z-indexed layers. on top of each other. And this is in 1957, right? We still haven't done things like this on the web. I love the drama of it. And if this is from 1957 and we have so many capabilities like this available today that we explored just a piece of, why do I feel like, as Jen Simmons eloquently puts it, that we're in a rut shaped like this? Why are we still making table-based layouts that are super static when we have all of these opportunities to create new experiences and share? Jen's not the only one who noticed this. This tweet resonated with a lot of people. We make the same sites again and again, and none of them are very memorable. Remember when we were talking about how emotions attach to the limbic system and they make them easier to recall? How are people going to remember your project, your site, the thing that you're spending so much time building, if it all is the same and no one's feeling anything when they go there? It's time for us to take up some space. Hopefully, some of the things that I showed to you today become beautiful primitives in the web of tomorrow. But I also built them with the existing technologies from today. So it's time to expand our minds and our projects beyond the rectangles of the past. As noted before, anything is possible. So my question for you is, what are you going to build? How can you in your everyday development life push the boundaries of what's possible? How can we all think bigger? How can we make something that doesn't exist, make our dreams out of code and share them? Because after all, that's what the web is for, to create these dreams and share them with each other. Thank you.
So the first question I have is, do you remember when the canvas tag was introduced to HTML? And what do you see from back then to now, the evolution of the web and animation? And also, did you think about the future of web animation around that time, or even 3 to 5 years ago? And did any of those predictions come true?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually have been a developer for a very long time. And I think that actually people were a little bit more creative and inventive a little while ago. I did notice that when people were first
making, MySpace sites and dumb stuff like that, and also just exploring all of the ways that we could first even just work with tables, people got really out there with layouts and just tried to push the boundaries of what was possible. And I think what ended up happening is we ended up having to do real solid work on the web, right? We have to work for our businesses and companies, and they have to be able to, hit that bottom line. And I do have a bunch of talks that are kind of focused around how to make functional and invisible animation on sites so that aren't ta-da, blah, 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 that kind of work for these kind of businesses and companies. But I also noticed that when people make sites where they do have a little bit more room for exploration, that they're not taking that chance. And what I have also seen is that I often am in rooms where someone is sitting there going oh, it was so cool what this other company did. Did you see it? And they pull it up. We should do something like that. We tend to only explore the boundaries of what's possible when there's prior art there. There are some companies out there that push the boundaries of that. I think that Stripe does a really good job of affecting the bottom line and also exploring how you tell stories with animation in order to hit that bottom line. They're a really good example of a company that does that. So what I guess I've noticed is that things were playful. They got a little bit more serious, but in the case of being more serious, we got a little bit too serious where we stopped remembering that people need to actually feel or remember your site when they go there. Otherwise, they're not going to be a customer. They're not going to convert. So I think that we have a little bit more opportunity to play than we're doing now.
Yeah. So you opened up your talk talking about how animation is supposed to evoke a feeling, and that kind of touches a little bit on how we just interact in day to day, and eventually essentially psychology, and designers think about this too, what colors do we want to evoke, even down to fast food restaurants. bright colors, you know, is supposed to like attract you to there and things like that. How do you see like the future between animation and designers and, you know, front end devs like working together to like have this like unify this like these ideas?
Yeah, we definitely need better tools because I think for myself, like I spend a lot of time working on these kind of projects and animating and failing and things, and a lot of people don't have the time for that, frankly. And I think that there's also like a disconnect where designers have an idea for something, they might make a movie, and then like how does that movie turn into a reality for a developer? Like the designer doesn't necessarily know you know, where things start and where things stop. So I do think that tooling could be better for sure, and that's why I get really excited about these new possibilities for the browser as it comes out, because if you have some of these primitives in the browser that allow you to create these experiences, you don't need to learn all of Three.js. You don't need to, you know, understand all of these pieces in order to make it work. Especially things like Nuxt, I think, you know, things like Flip, I will do because I am interested in animation. But will the, you know, average person who needs to animate a bunch of things do, you know, do that, you know, entire implementation? Probably not. They'll probably either like try it out and make it work, or they'll scrap the project because it wasn't performant. So I think the more we have some of these abstractions where we can work a little bit quicker, I think there are a couple of people working in this space that do really, really good work. But yeah, hopefully in the future we see a little bit more of these primitives so that that connection gets a little bit easier to work with.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so last question here is, what do you think are the trade-offs of doing animation with JavaScript versus CSS? Like, are they kind of codependent?
Yeah, I mean, so CSS can be really performant for some DOM elements. I tend to do a lot of things with SVG, which actually the performance is can be higher with request animation frame than it will be with CSS. I ran a bunch of benchmarks about that, and if you want to check out that article, that's a whole article. JavaScript has some capabilities that I wish CSS has, but CSS is kind of clunky for. So if you're trying to do simple animations where you're doing one state to another, great. It's super, you know, it's actually super declarative because you can be like, go one here, do this thing in between. And you can have the keyframes too. But once you start to chain things, once things get a little bit more complicated, I really suggest moving into JavaScript because of many reasons. But one of them is that JavaScript can sometimes give you a timeline. So what you can do is you can make sure that things are following each other. You can set them a little bit before and after each other. You can add a label, so you can say like, okay, everything burst at this label, and like everything happened right here. And then no matter if you change the timing before it, then it doesn't matter. They all still keep bursting and everything still follows in line. Another thing that JavaScript allows you to do is speed up your animations or slow them down. So like, let's say you do something really complicated in CSS and someone comes along and they're like, you know, it's okay, but I just want it to be like a little bit slower. And you're like, oh God. In JavaScript, that's one line of code. So you can actually speed up your animations with one line of code. So you can be like, oh yeah, that'll take me a little while. I'm gonna need to build like at least 10 hours for that. And then you like take a long lunch, get some, I've never done that. So there's a bunch of different things like that. One other really big thing is the flexibility in eases, because cubic Beziers in CSS have two handles for those values. You have some flexibility, but not a lot. In JavaScript, you have infinite number of handles, so you can make one ease do like a whole bounce, or crazy elastic eases, and you don't have boundaries on those. So you can do way more realistic eases and accomplish way more without having to write every single, like in CSS, you have to be like, go up and down and up and down and up and down and like in JavaScript, you basically say, go here, use this ease, and you're done. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you, Jasmine.